Hey gang, it's me, your host Logan Albright, back again with another book review. I know it's been a couple of weeks because I was overseas and I had to get back and do some more reading. I'm actually reading, I'm in the middle of an Anthony Burgess novel now that I really like, and I can't wait to review for you guys, but it's very long and very complex and I haven't finished it yet, so I'm trying to do that. But in the meantime, I wanted to provide a video for my channel so that my viewers don't get bored. And I have a little stopgap for you now, something a little bit different. I read these collection of essays by Emma Goldman, the famous Russian anarchist. And, you know, I make no secret of the fact that I am a libertarian and my views tend towards libertarian anarchism. And I've read a lot of thinkers in that vein. I've read much in economics. I've read a lot in political philosophy, but I really haven't delved into kind of the roots of anarchy theory. And anarchy as a political philosophy kind of derives from communist, essentially. It derives from a socialist, communist, pro-worker sort of left-wing origin. And the original anarchists were people like Emma Goldman who were sympathetic to the cause of the communists. You know, the thinkers that I read and the philosophy that I'm attracted to is not a communist anarchy. It's more of an individualist anarchy. And so I wanted to kind of delve into the original writings, and I'm recognizing that I'm going to disagree with portions of them and see what they had to say. So I got this little collection of essays by Emma Goldman, Anarchism and Other Essays. This is a terrible print-on-demand, create space version that's very badly formatted, and I don't recommend it, but it was what they had on Amazon, so it's what I got. But it contains her views on anarchism and a number of other topics, which I found quite interesting. What I find interesting about these kind of early 20th century, late 19th century thinkers is how different the climate was back then. I read about the conditions of workers and factories, and I talked about this in a review I did of Jack London's book on socialism. And, you know, I wasn't there. I don't know what it was like. It sounds pretty bad. I don't know why it was so bad. I don't know what the conditions were like before that. No one ever talks about what things were like before that caused people to migrate into the cities and take these jobs in factories in the first place. Was it better? Was it worse? I don't know. No one ever talks about it. But I'm sympathetic to the views of these thinkers who looked around them and saw suffering in the world and were upset by it and wanted to do something about it. And while I don't agree with a lot of their conclusions, I'm sympathetic to the urge to want to make things better. And I think Emma Goldman has a lot of the right instincts, and while I disagree with her on some things, I am generally sympathetic to her views on anarchism, because she basically believes that it's not the job of men to boss other men around. It's not good to be a servant or a master. It's good to be free. It's good to be an individual and live your life to the fullest, which I fully agree with and think is great. And so she talks about that in the main essay in this book, about how her views of anarchism are to liberate people from being slaves and from, you know, the tyranny of the government or the tyranny of the corporation, which I don't quite agree with her on, but it was a different time. Tyranny of other, you know, institutions, the church. She's very anti-religious, which I'm not so much anti-religious, but, you know, I'm sympathetic to a lot of her views because she was responding to what was going on around her. And if I understand correctly, she was kind of horrified by the what happened with Bolshevism and the Russian Revolution and how that turned so violent. And she, you know, there's an essay in here about the psychology of political violence, and she doesn't exactly apologize for it, but she kind of makes this argument that, you know, if you're backed into a corner, you can't be surprised when people become violent in desperate situations. And, you know, I think that's sort of a dangerous argument to make, because almost anybody can argue that they've been backed into a corner and they have no choice. I think you need to take a more principled stand against violence. But I think, nevertheless, in spite of that, she seemed to be pretty horrified by what went on in the Russian Revolution and how, like, Leninism turned to Stalinism and you had the gulags and all that stuff. So, you know, she didn't know. She hadn't seen what was going to happen, what the fruits of communism were going to be. And so you got to cut people a little slack for having the knowledge that was available to them at the time. But still, I find her ideas interesting. There's a lot of other essays in this book that I think are really interesting because they're on different topics, and I agree with some of them more than others. But I largely find myself sympathetic to her views. There's a piece on prisons and how she's very anti-prison. She's a prison abolitionist. And I'm not exactly a prison abolitionist, but I'm pretty close to a prison abolitionist, because I think if you're intending on letting people out of prison, there's very little good that's done by prisons. Whereas, you know, there's some people that are just so, you know, psychotic or heinous or commit such evil crimes that you just can't let them be a part of society. And while I oppose the death penalty, so I think, you know, life sentences in prison are appropriate for those people. But there's other people who, maybe go to prison for a year and then get out again, I don't see that the year in prison is benefiting anybody. And so I'm, very sympathetic to her view on prisons as totally counterproductive. She's got a lot of stuff in here about feminism, which I really like. This is sort of very first wave feminism, and I'm quite sympathetic to her view. I think a lot of modern day feminists would not enjoy her views on feminism, because she calls out women for being hypocrites, for wanting to have equal rights, but at the same time demanding deference from men in a lot of regards. She is kind of opposed to universal suffrage, to women's suffrage, because she regards the participation in government as sort of inherently corrupt, and she doesn't want women to be involved in that corruption. She complains about kind of the new societal norms, or the new kind of restrictions that are placed on women in the guise of women's liberation. She talks about how, women wanted the right to work, and now they're working themselves to death trying to outcompete men, and it's not any better, and they feel like they can't enjoy love or marriage or family. Not marriage. I'll get into marriage in a little bit. She has an essay all about marriage. But love and family and motherhood and the fruits of your life, because they feel like they have to work themselves to death to outcompete men. And so she kind of talks about the unfulfilled promise of women's liberation, and how instead of making women more free, able to live the lives they want to live, it's actually kind of enslaving them to a life they don't really want to live. I find that very interesting, and I think that she's very thoughtful on that. My actual favorite essay in here, I think she's at her best when she's talking about love and beauty and joy and art. I think that's when she's at her best as a writer. And so my favorite essay in here is one on the hypocrisy of Puritanism, in which she's kind of lamenting the Puritan ethic that is supposed to regard life as an inherently bad thing, that life is inherently suffering, and that man's role in life is to just suffer and do penance and apologize for existing, and turn his back on all the good things that are enjoyable in life, all the pleasures of life, all the beauties, all the art, and just have a stark, miserable existence until you die. She's very critical of that, and I think that's one of her more well-written essays in here. As a writer in general, I think she leaves a lot to be desired. She tends towards the polemical. She's very, likes to use slogans and political language that I don't think are particularly good. Her writing's a little bit dry. Her writing is also very emotional. She tends to use appeals to emotion and anecdote as her means of rhetoric, instead of kind of taking a more rational view on a lot of things. So I don't love her as a writer, but I think she really kind of comes out of her shell and shines most, not when she's talking about politics, but when she's talking about things like the joy of being alive and all the pleasures that life has to offer. She seems to really shine in that respect. So that's what I like about her. I want to read a quick passage out of the Puritanism essay, because I think it's one of the most eloquent passages in the book, and one of my favorite things she has to say. I think she puts it very nicely. So I'll read this passage very quickly. Puritanism is based on the Calvinistic idea that life is a curse imposed upon man by the wrath of God. In order to redeem himself, man must do constant penance, must repudiate every natural and healthy impulse, and turn his back on joy and beauty. I think that's a very moving kind of take on the idea of this asceticism that is preached by a lot of branches of religion, that says, you're not allowed to enjoy your life, basically. It's all about the afterlife. So I enjoyed that passage a lot. She has another essay in here in which she's very critical of marriage as an institution. She says that marriage is primarily an economic institution, and it's a way for the state to kind of enforce a certain role on not just women, but also men. And she argues that, if you're in love and you want to be together and raise a child together, you'll do that. And if you're not in love and you don't want to do those things, the institution of marriage isn't going to make you do those things, or not any way that's going to be satisfactory to anyone involved. So this is sort of ties into a theme that's one of my favorite parts of her writing, is this idea about kind of social institutions and the role of people instead of relying on the state for things like that. She's got an essay on prostitution, and she regards prostitution as very evil, and it subjugates women and puts them in a terrible position of essentially sex slavery. But she argues in that essay that the state, the law, is not the way to solve that problem. The way to solve complex social problems is not through the laws of the land. It's through kind of public opinion and social pressure and things that are more organic. And she says, basically when you prohibit something legally, you just drive it underground and you create a crime syndicate out of it, and it makes things worse instead of making things better, which is a position that I completely agree with. And I think that this is something that's not talked about enough, is the need for communities to solve problems, solve complex social problems themselves without relying on a third party to just pass a law and send policemen around to solve it. I think that's an excellent point, and that's a kind of thread that runs through all of her writing, which is one of the best things I think she has to say, because it's very true, and it's not something that is talked about enough, and people always want to just outsource their problem solving to the government to solve these problems. So, I'm really pleased with her writing in that respect. Another common thread that runs throughout this set of essays is her anti-militarism. She's very anti-war. She thinks that war, I think she calls it legalized slaughter, which I totally agree with. I think that's an excellent characterization of war. And she's critical of kind of she calls it patriotism, but I think it's more accurately characterized as nationalism or jingoism, this idea that, like, your country is the best because it's your country, and you have to go subjugate all the other countries in the world and be dominant over them. And she says this idea is just causes all kinds of problems and creates wars and creates conflicts when there need not be any. And so I think that's a very powerful message too. We need more anti-war thinkers. I feel like the anti-war movement has sort of dried up in America. We used to be pretty strong, great guns, but I mean, the Ukraine thing has sort of brought it back a little bit, but still there's all these people agitating for war because, now they want us to go to war over Ukraine as well. So there's a pro-war movement that has been energized by that as well. So, it's nice to hear some anti-war thinkers, because I think that's really important, and I think it's one of the most important kind of policy areas that we can deal with is trying to keep our men and women in uniform out of war, because that would be bad. We don't want them to die. Not good. So overall, I really enjoyed delving into the writings of Emma Goldman. I don't think she's a stellar writer as far as her prose is concerned, but she's certainly an interesting thinker, a little bit idealistic, a little bit naive perhaps, but someone who has a lot of ideas that I think are still very important and I'm very sympathetic to. I love the idea of not ruling over anyone else and not being ruled. I love the anti-militarism. I love the pro, individual choice. I love all the anti-prison stuff she has. I just think she's got a very healthy take on life in general, although I don't agree with everything she has to say. I think she's a little bit misguided when it comes to kind of the free association of labor. But, there's parts in here about how labor leaders were being assassinated, and you can understand why that would mobilize people to be very critical of the capitalist establishment. So, I kind of cut these 19th century thinkers a little bit of slack because they hadn't seen what was to come in the 20th century in the name of these ideas yet. So I really enjoyed it. I also have a collection of the works of Prudhon, an early anarchist thinker who's the one who said that property is theft, which to me sounds like kind of a gibberish idea, but I don't want to judge it too harshly until I read what he actually has to say, because you can't just take a single sentence out of a book and judge it based on that. So he's an early left-wing anarchist thinker that I want to read, and I'm going to get to that eventually, who knows when. But I hope this has tided you over a little bit until I can finish this Anthony Burgess novel and hopefully get that to you next week with my next video. If you have any thoughts on Emma Goldman or these controversial ideas, I'd love to hear them, or anarchism in general. Please leave them in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications. My God, there's a lot to do, isn't there? But anyway, I've been your host, Logan Albright. I can't wait to be back with you again with another book review. Take it easy, have a good day, and I'll catch you next time.